Now, Chuck Berry is considered to be the architect of rock and roll, really the one who started it. But because he was black, he did not really get the recognition for being the leading figure in rock and roll, even though he really was. That position as being that leading figure, or quote unquote king of rock and roll, goes to Elvis Presley, 1935 to 1977. Now, Presley was definitely, without an argument, made unparalleled contributions to the genre. He brought it to the forefront. Everybody knows who Elvis is. Even if they've never actually seen real footage of Elvis, they know what he looks like. They know what he sounds like, thanks to millions of Elvis impersonators around the world. Everybody knows about his hair. Everybody knows about the way he moves and his oh. And then there's just the style of his voice. There was actually a research project done where they took kids from around the world and they showed them pictures of famous people. There were only 3 faces that they showed that everyone around the world could correctly identify. And one of them was Elvis Presley. The other 2 were Mickey Mouse and Michael Jackson. So Elvis literally is known around the world. And because he was white, he had the privilege to be able to bring rock and roll to the entire country. White parents who would never have let their white kids listen to Chuck Berry were okay with their kids listening to Elvis Presley. Maybe it wasn't their favorite thing, but he helped break down that racial barrier. And then after him, parents were then accepting of artists of either race or any race, actually, because we'll look at Richie Valens and how the Hispanic culture really gets its start within the music industry here as well. So Elvis Presley really is a pioneer in that way. Before 1960, the guy had 18 million records. Okay, that is unbelievably huge for the time. Back then, an award for records was a gold record, and that one sold I believe 100,000. And here's a guy selling millions of records. They actually invent the platinum record just because of the success of artists like Elvis and people who came after him. So very, very successful, not just in America, around the world, especially Britain. Kids in Britain really loved Elvis. In fact, when the Beatles became famous later on, people referred to it as their revenge for Elvis, that our American artists have been so popular over there, and now this was their British artists being famous over here. But definitely a success around the world. Very vivid in his style. I won't even call his style what he does dancing, because if you've ever seen him move on stage, it's not really dancing. He didn't even refer to himself as dancing. He called it waggling. He says, "I don't dance, I waggle." But it was a very hip-based movement. He moved his hips a lot, which really upset grown-ups in the 60s. In fact, when Elvis was filmed for television shows, like late night shows, there were things written into the recording contracts that they could only film him from the chest up, because they were afraid that if they showed him moving his hips, that there would be upset people at home who couldn't stand that sort of overtly sexual movement. Now, based on the stuff that we're used to seeing today, the halftime shows over the past decade, Elvis seems, mild as a pussycat. But back then, this was a big deal, and he was the first artist that started sending girls into hysterics. That is, girls in the audience would start getting so worked up that they'd hyperventilate and literally pass out in the performance. I told you before about one of my professors, Dr. James Keyes. Brilliant man, passed away recently, but he actually performed with Elvis. Elvis had come into his town. He needed horn players to play backup. Dr. Keyes got pulled in, and he would tell the stories of sitting there behind Elvis playing horns for him, and how girls would just be passing out and people were throwing underwear up on stage, and in his very typical dry wit, he's like, I never saw that at a Beethoven concert. It was just something the world had never seen. That was part of the reason that they didn't let him be shown on television from the waist down. They thought maybe that was some of what it was. And doctors were literally afraid that teenage girls around the country would be passing out at home and parents wouldn't know what to do, and that emergency rooms would be overwhelmed. And in retrospect, it seems silly, but it was a huge deal. He was a tremendous star. And then he got drafted. He was drafted into the Army. Now, he was one of the most famous people in the world. And the Army recognized that if anything happened to Elvis in the Army, that it would be a black eye that they would never recover from. And they actually tried to let him out of it. They said, no, the work you do is important. Go do your music. But Elvis actually wanted to serve his country. He took that very seriously. And so he went in to basic, but again, the Army was so scared of anything happening that they basically never let him see any actual action. I mean, it was the sort of thing. It's like, all right, everybody, go run 10 miles. Hey, Elvis, not you. Would you go get me a cup of coffee or something? He absolutely hated the way that he was treated differently. And so at the end of 2 years, he wasn't going to renew his contract, and he left. But he took that opportunity to reinvent himself. And instead of just coming back as a recording artist making records, he became now a film star. All of his early movies still had him singing and dancing, but now he was doing it in the movies. And he becomes the first rock artist to have a movie career, where his career gets a great deal of advancement from people being able to see him in addition to hear him around the world. Of every artist, he is probably one of the most successful in all of history. The guy had 14 gold records and a movie in a 2-year time period. He's got way more than 14 gold records. But in just 2 years, that's what he did. The guy recorded and recorded and recorded. He was a hard working guy. He moved in funny ways. I shouldn't say funny, but it was funny. It was unique. It was different. It was, again, his waggling or his wiggling. He really helped define rock and roll's new attitude. Kind of this attitude of, I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm going to do what I want to do. And he really defied a lot of people's expectations, right? One of his early hits, or one of his biggest hits, was a 2-sided album, an A-side and a B-side, of Hound Dog on one side and Don't Be Cruel on the other. This record was so successful that it topped the charts, but nobody knew what to call it, because when we talk about a song topping the charts, it deals with record sales and radio play. Well, Hound Dog was getting played on pop stations, and it was topping the charts. But it was also being played on R&B stations, and it was topping the charts. And it was also being played on country stations, and it was topping the charts. He literally was the most popular song in all the most popular genres, because he really kind of brought all of that together. So that happened in 1956, and that one is definitely worth listening to. So we will listen to Hound Dog, and we will also see a short movie clip from Forrest Gump. It's a great little moment where he, again, it's fiction, but Forrest Gump as a kid gets to meet Elvis Presley, and you kind of see him discovering his dance style. And then the real thing I like is there's this moment where Forrest and his mom are walking past a TV shop, and she says, "This is not for children's eyes," and you see him dancing up there on stage. Uh, Elvis Presley was a remarkable performer, but later in life, his health definitely took a beating. He put on a great deal of weight. Um, his favorite sandwich was a peanut butter and marshmallow sandwich. He called it a fluffer nutter, peanut butter, marshmallows, and the whole thing got deep fried. It sounds like a heart attack waiting to happen. But that was his favorite food. He did have some trouble with drugs and alcohol. He would take some drugs to get energy for his performances, and then he was so hyped up that he couldn't sleep, so he would drink alcohol to try to relax himself and and it became this vicious cycle, and he did end up dying as a result of those various causes. He had a heart attack, died in it's the Hilton in Las Vegas. Actually, if you go stay there, there's a statue of him, and it talks about that's where he died. And he basically had a heart attack on the toilet. I got to say, I feel sorry for the maid who found him the next morning. It's bad enough cleaning up after people, but finding a dead body on the toilet and then having it turn out to be the most famous person in the world, that had to be a pretty bad day for that poor lady. But I guess the joke here is, Elvis Presley is the king of rock and roll, and he died on a throne. But it's definitely a sad thing, and like so many artists, it makes us question, what more could Elvis have done if he had lived longer? Because he was still innovating, he was still leading the industry when he had that heart attack. And still today, like I say, one of the best known artists. Tons of impersonators, tons of references, and maybe holographic technology soon as well. So we'll see what happens. But let's go ahead and stop here and watch a couple things about Elvis real quick.